Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks what atheists should be doing next in a godless world.
Hey Nathan.
Hi, Todd.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Yeah,
Excellent.
how are you?
It's great. I'm wonderful. You know, it's springtime. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
in bloom. There are wonderful new articles on internet magazines such as Liberal
Mm-hmm.
Currents. I came across
Yes.
one the other day about John Stuart Mill's On Liberty in the age of
Yes.
cancel culture and fake news. Have you seen that article at all?
I saw that the other day, actually, yeah. It's
Really?
pretty interesting, yeah.
What did you think of it?
It was quite well written.
hmm
Yes.
Yeah, in case if you're listening, if in case you
Uh-huh.
can't tell, Nathan Alexander recently wrote this piece, published it online back in March. So we're going to take some time to talk about that today. Get through Mill, who I assume you're a pretty big fan of.
I'm a fan of Mill, yes.
Yeah, and we'll have to tie this into religion and atheism at some point.
Yeah.
Um, but you're taking on this is a pretty big bite, right?
Yeah.
This is a jump from a classical liberal writing in what 1840s, 1850s, 18 to 1880s,
On Liberty is published in 1859, like near the end of
1859,
Mill's career. Yeah.
and applying it, mapping it on to cancel culture and fake news today. That's a
Yeah.
big leap. What brought you to that? What brought you to that
Um,
connection? Walk us through the process, Nathan
I'd
Alexander.
always wanted to write some article like this, just because On Liberty it's this book Mill writes in 1859, and it's one of the kind of defining arguments in favor of free speech
hmm
in general. And Mill in general is sort of seen as one of the founders of the liberal tradition, we'll
mm
say. And so I wanted to sort of read his On Liberty in light of trying to think about some of the current issues around free speech we face today, about like how to regulate fake news and what to do about so-called cancel culture. I mean, I think the thing is in the article that in some cases, like Mill offers arguments that could be applicable, but in other cases, like he just doesn't foresee certain things coming out. So
So
I
then
tried to
take us
balance
back
this.
to 1859. What is he writing about then? What's the if you're gonna distill this for a podcast audience, what do you get from Mill's writing in 1859 in On Liberty about free speech?
I think the thing to say, I guess, well, maybe just to give some background about Mill, because it's always fun to talk about his background. So he was raised.
When I think of Mill, I think of fun. That's the big thing.
I mean, it's funny because he was brought up by his father, James Mill, who's also a philosopher, and basically with the idea of showing that through education one could sort of raise a like kind of a child prodigy. And so James Mill created this very rigorous program of education for his son, in which he read like he learned Latin and ancient Greek by the time he was 8 years old, and was like reading like Plato and Aristotle and things like that in the
hmm
original languages, and like composing lengthy treatises on this or that, like when
hmm
he's 10 years old and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it's
And that worked out perfectly for him, didn't
he was totally normal and totally well adjusted. I mean,
it?
I mean, it's definitely like if I don't have kids now, but if I have kids, I'm definitely gonna give them the same education
Oh
as
God, I hope that Mill had a complete breakdown. He totally snapped.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's oh God,
yeah,
terrible. So
yeah.
close to doing it though, right? It seemed perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's a really interesting, like, to read his autobiography, because he does, by the time he's around 20, basically he was raised to be kind of a philosopher and a reformer,
Mm,
like his father. But then he sort of had this idea in his brain, like, okay, if every sort of reform I want happens, would I be happy then? And
mm,
then he realized the answer was no. So then, like, he pretty much fell into a depression that lasted some time, and eventually kind of came out of it by reading poetry and things like that. Which is like basically he he realized that there was sort of more to life than
God, his life sounds like a Smith song. Oh God, everything I wanted. It wasn't meant to be. I just read poetry. Oh,
yeah.
come on. All right. So anyway, so what does he come up with? What's in this? I think this is the big one for him, right? On Liberty.
On Liberty. Yeah, like he wrote some other. He wrote A System of Logic was another bigger thing, but I think on Liberty is the one he's best known for, and that's still probably the most read today. So it's sort of a general defense of freedom of speech, and just freedom in general, I should say, and liberty in general. I think like with why it's important, I think for like contemporary issues about allowing kind of a wide range of what can be debated. Well, basically, it's also maybe important to say like it was an argument against. It wasn't just against government censorship, but also against social censorship.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, obviously he thought like government cracking down on liberty and things was bad, but there was also this danger of like society ostracizing individuals for views that they held.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
this is also a work that it's kind of difficult to overstate the impact it's had on our lives, even if we don't know it. It's pretty shocking conceptually. So the thing with his point of liberty itself and the way
Mm,
he defines it is it's freedom from, which if you're an
that's true.
American,
Yeah.
this is very much the world you live in. It's freedom from restriction. So it's not a positive freedom. The way we can think about it is like positive freedom is the ability to take a bus or a subway or having a car, right? Having a car as a teenager is this idea of freedom. But that's not what we're thinking about. He's going in a different direction, which is liberty, which means like no one is going to stop you. So this idea that you need a car to get around, that's not liberty. Liberty is that you are able to go. The world is open. There are no locked doors. You're able to walk out the door into the world and make your way without people blocking you. Mill's idea is that you're free from obstructions.
Yeah, I think so. That's the thing. Like he wanted to, yeah, provide for kind of maximum freedom. I think the thing is, it's sort of to take it to this like his utilitarian ideas. So utilitarianism wants to maximize happiness and minimize pain or whatever. So and anyway, I think, and then like Mill saw allowing freedom as the way you can do this best, like because he thought people know best how to live their lives and so on.
And you find in it, you're focused in this on the freedom of speech, right? That seems to be the big one you're looking at
Hmm.
in.
Yeah. Anyway, the main point is looking at like freedom of speech. So I think, I mean, one of the things, or the sort of the main points in the article for that is about. I mean, it's sort of obvious that if you allow for maximum ability to speak for people, that the chances of coming upon the truth are highest, so that people, if they're debating things and so on, like a society could coming towards truth is seems more possible. And so Mill thought that was a good thing. But the interesting thing, like even if arguments were wrong or false, nonetheless, like he wouldn't want to censor them because he made the argument, and I think it's maybe the more interesting argument, that like if you don't know why you hold a particular view to be true, then you're just sort of holding it as a, he says, like a prejudice. And I think there's something to that. Like it just forces you to know the arguments for why certain things, why you believe them to be true, basically. But anyway, one of the kind of the things I raised in the article is I think there's a lot to that argument, but then, in the case of, say, like, white supremacists or something, and they wanna keep debating you or something about, why, mm, non-white people are inferior or something. I mean, like, basically the question I sort of asked is, like, how often are we meant to debate these people? Anytime a white supremacist pops up that we're forced to go, like, enter in a debate with them or something. Um,
Right, do it again and
yeah,
again and again.
yeah,
There's an example of this that's, I mean, it's generational now, which is the book The Bell Curve, which is this, it's pseudoscience. It argues that you can quantify measures that show that people of African ancestry are lesser
mm,
developed, I think,
yeah,
than
yeah,
European
or
people.
just had lower IQ.
It's is that what? Oh, okay, yeah, on the bell curve, and it's empirically wrong. It's objectively wrong. The reason it and so this has come up as part of the cancel culture debates, but the reason that Mill would give and the reason that people do give for why it ought to be discussed is it gives you the opportunity to debunk it,
Yeah, that's true.
right? When you're confronted with it and you're in a room with other people and everyone's saying this is obviously wrong, that's a powerful thing. We need to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
mean, yeah.
I think that's Mill's argument.
That, like, we can learn more about, if you hold racial equality or something, like, you learn more about your that view, and if the view is strengthened when you debunk something like the bell curve. Um, but yeah, I mean, it does raise the question, like, how often are we really needing to debunk this? And I don't think,
Well, how do you think that that is something worth holding on to then?
yeah,
Not to give the whole article away, but let's
uh,
give the whole article away, Nathan. Are you getting paid for per view on that
no,
page?
no, unfortunately
No,
not.
then okay. Let's
Yes,
by the way, spoilers, you
yeah,
guys.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a difficult issue. I guess I don't think I really come down in a like a solid position on that one. And I don't think Mill does either necessarily. Like, or maybe he just doesn't. I think one thing he really doesn't anticipate is kind of like bad faith actors, or doesn't quite
Right.
anticipate it to the extent that it's a problem today.
All right, so wait, let's go over it again for a second. So this is something where it's maximal liberty, right? So we want to. He's imagining a world if we're going to have this utility where everyone reaches the greatest happiness. What we need to do is have the greatest amount of freedom of speech. If we have the greatest amount of freedom of speech, we're still going to get garbage, right? We're going to get people who know what they're talking about. We're going to get good things. We're going to get honest disagreements. We're also going to get garbage. But the garbage has we should hear the garbage because for all these reasons, right? Maybe it's right. We don't know that. Or we get to debunk it, right? Or we know it strengthens our argument for the positive thing. All of these are good examples. But you're saying that there are you're saying, well, maybe. So what are the reasons why maybe that's not the case?
I think I think the thing is that for Mill, probably it was the way he thought it was that the people spewing what might be garbage, like, to them, from their own perspective, they were speaking the truth. But I think the problem with, say, like, today, white supremacists and racists and so on, I mean, I think they'll just use cynical arguments and things like that. Like, they'll use debate as a way to legitimize, or to give the appearance that their positions are legitimate. And and I think that's a difficult thing, because when you actually do kind of debunk, or like debunk them, you give the impression that, like, this is kind of a legitimate view that people hold, and even though, like, such and such person would say it's wrong, nonetheless, like, there's another side who holds it to be true, and it gives the impression that there's some kind of debate. So I think,
Mm.
um,
Give it. Tell us some more. What's a good example of that where it's either not a good, it's plainly not a good debate, or it's they're being deceptive.
um, I mean, I'm not sure, like, off the top of my head, but I think that's what, like, a white supremacist tactic is, though, to, like, and I mean, even, well, even to make it, like, maybe less controversial, like the issue of like creationism could be something too that they they really want to get into, like creationists really want to get into debates with people who believe in evolution as a way to make it appear that like there's two positions here and they're sort of, you can choose which one you subscribe to or whatever. um
Right? Yeah. The whole, I think the creationists called it like teach the debate,
yes, right, or
right?
yeah, I think
That there
teach the
was
controversy or whatever, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah.
When in actuality there wasn't.
Right, right.
There's a complete consensus. It's the evidence is overwhelming. There's zero evidence for their position, but they want to create this appearance that there is an intellectually defensible position, and therefore we can teach creationism in school, or at
Mm.
least teach that evolution is wrong.
Yeah, or like, yeah, to put in front of students like there are multiple positions that you could subscribe to or something. I mean, I see the value like in debating as sort of an intellectual exercise, debating creationists, because I do think Mill is right about you learn more about your own position by kind of addressing critiques from creationists and so on. At the same time, like you're legitimizing their view sort of tacitly by engaging in debate with them. So it's a kind of a puzzle, like how to sort of strike that balance.
Yeah, and that's a really tough one because I'm not sure if it worked. And there are a couple other examples I can think of now, and without having an answer, think about it in exactly the way you framed it, right? Is this legitimizing a position that's complete garbage, or is it actually doing the things that Mill predicted and suggested,
Mm,
right? So if we consider the creationism debate, which, and we've seen lots of those, and some of them are kind of fun, although the creationists are always dull. The global warming,
right. Yes, that's true.
right? We've
Hmm,
seen
hmm.
this for years, and in the background, I think it was Exxon was sued for this. Oil and gas companies knew for
Mm,
years that their
right.
product was polluting. They knew it was responsible for global warming. They had some of the best data, some of the best models on what the effect actually was, but they were supplying garbage. They were paying think tanks to produce literature that muddled the water and made this fake debate where there was none.
Hmm.
Right? Like
Yeah.
they did that pretty intentionally. And I think anti-vaxxers are kind of similar, where they have very debunked science. But anytime this debate opens up, it just gets them more attention. So, I don't know of those three. I don't know if there are any cases where greater debate actually strengthened. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I would suggest maybe global warming,
Mm,
but the other two, I'm
yeah.
not sure.
It's a really good question. I mean, the thing I think Mill really, maybe he didn't quite realize that in his view, probably he thought most of society is just earnestly seeking the truth, and if someone was found to be wrong, then they would just admit it. Like if someone else made a better argument, they would be happy to admit it. But obviously, that's not that's not how it goes usually. Uh, so yeah, it's a difficult thing. I think another thing is like how to actually regulate these debates. Like I think it would be wrong to censor, um, arguments like against, or like to sort of criminalize, say, anti-vaxxers or something. But and I
Well,
don't know. I
no.
mean, even that's like uh, a an interesting point. I mean, I guess so. Mill did make this point in Law and Liberty later on, and he was said basically, if it's true that such and such a person is, like misstating their opponent's view deliberately or like omitting key facts in their arguments, in that case, that would kind of, society should sort of condemn that way of arguing, but then he also said like it's hard to know though when someone is kind of being genuinely bad faith or if they're just confused. I mean, it's hard to know in that
Yeah.
case. Yeah.
I mean, does he give any examples of when it's appropriate to shut someone down or shut something down?
Yeah, so he does give cases of like prohibiting speech. And the interesting thing is yeah, that like he is known as like a like a strong liberal champion, but then he does give cases where we can shut down sort of speech. Anyway, like the examples he gives are when they instigate, well, he says some mischievous act. So his example is saying that corn dealers are starvers of the poor, and then and then
This being British corn dealers,
yes,
meaning
right,
grain,
exactly,
sort of
exactly,
like,
yes,
yeah, grain dealers, not the
right,
farmers,
yes,
not people buying it, the sort of like middlemen.
yes.
Yeah.
So basically, he said like, okay, you could say that in the press or something, but then if you saw like an angry mob who was at the gates of the corn dealer's house, and they're just sort of like baying for blood, and then you go up and say like, yeah, like these corn dealers are starvers of the poor, um, then that's likely to instigate violence, and in that case, he would say that those people would lose their speech rights.
Which, okay, and this is something that's very frustrating and something that I think contradicts his larger project because one of the things he's talking about is we need to rediscover truths, right? We need to allow everybody to say what they mean. We can't suppress facts. We need to have an open debate about these arguments. But if you go out and you say corn dealers are starving the poor, meaning these people are hoarding grain,
Yes, right.
jacking up the prices, and this was the historical example, and it had government protection, right? There's a lot of context to this story,
Yeah.
but if we just take the story for what it is, which is that someone is being greedy, they're hoarding something for profit at the expense of people, and it's literally starving people. He says at this point it's wrong to say, even if it's true. That to me a is a problem in his work, right? That you have to that on the one hand he's telling us you can never, we need this open discussion. We need to be able to find the truth. We need to challenge our preconceptions about the world. We need to face new facts and consider them logically in debate openly, but we can't. But there are some times where you just can't, you can't handle the truth.
Hmm.
It's really weird. Although, and the flip side of this though, because that his argument there is that you can't use this to incite violence, which I think is the larger point,
Yeah.
or the more specific point that he's trying to make in that case, is that even if it's true, you shouldn't use it to incite violence.
So I guess for Mill, like this is where his idea of it's called the harm principle comes in.
Mhm.
So,
Well, wait. Okay,
oh,
then give me a second. Those 19th century corn dealers. Ah, what bastards. Forget those guys. Okay,
yes.
Nathan, continue,
Yeah.
please.
So basically, the harm principle that's formulated by Mill, I'll just quote him what he says. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So basically, the reason for prohibiting speech is because it's preventing harm basically to others. Yeah, so that's why he makes that argument. I think it's difficult too because yeah, I mean, say someone reads reads in the press about reads a newspaper article about how bad corn dealers are, and then
Hmm.
they go out and take take matters into their own hands or something. It's hard to say where to draw the line, when when you're inciting violence. I mean, I do think the context matters, but it's also kind of a difficult line, where to draw the line. I think.
Yeah, yeah. So there's, to speak directly to that. I don't know if you followed anything about QAnon, but one of their big claims, yeah, it's just a nonsense. It's not even a conspiracy theory because it's not a theory. It's just
Right.
endless nonsense. Was that there was like a pedophile ring run out of the basement of Comet Pizza in Washington D.C., and eventually one guy showed up with a gun
Right.
and
Yes.
demanded to see the basement, right? And of course, there's nothing to report there. But there are okay. So I'm going to change gears on you, Nathan, and talk about some people who do have answers about white supremacy and especially things like neo-fascism, and that's groups like Antifa or Antifa,
Mm,
which is a
hmm.
strange pronunciation. I don't
Yeah.
buy it, and they
What's the correct
are.
pronunciation?
I
It,
always thought it was Antifa. It's
ah.
anti-fascist. That's how you get
Mm.
Antifa. It's or anti-fascist action. If you're so, it's that's what I always thought it was.
Right.
That's how everybody I knew said it.
Interesting.
But
Yes.
yeah, so they have a very different position, and because they're not liberals, they don't follow that classical tradition, and so there's a big challenge to that. And their position is one. I mean, the first point is this idea of freedom of speech does not exist. It's a construct. We are not empowered by God to have freedom of speech. We don't have a creator who gave us freedom of speech. That never existed until 250 years ago, right? This is something the government invented, the government attempts to protect, but it can never do so completely, right? It's a construct, and that it shouldn't be extended to everyone, especially groups that where we know how it ends. So it came out of I think the root of Antifa was in Germany, where they knew what fascism led to, right? And they're like, we're just not going to have it. As soon as this starts, we see it again and again historically, country after country. It starts with a small group saying this shit. It grows into a bigger group. That bigger group suppresses everybody else. They take power, and then we get hell on earth. And we're not going to have that. And the only time we have a chance to stop it is when it's these small groups. So they go out and contest. And this is how Antifa actually works. This is how it's worked for years. Anytime the Klan has a rally, they're there. Anytime white supremacists want to do a march down the street, they go there and confront them. And with the idea of like, you do not have the right to be here. You do not have the right to say this. A free society cannot exist with these ideas in it. And there is support for this in liberal theorization as well. And I thought I had discovered this and I felt so clever. And my understanding of it was like, oh yeah, right. Because if one of the main points of liberalism is tolerance, and this is built into Mill's work. I think he incorporates a lot of Locke in it. Locke wrote about the importance of toleration, how we need to accept other people's views, for all of the reasons that Mill discusses. Of course, Locke had this thing where you can't tolerate atheists because
Right.
they're going to
Yes.
ruin the fucking world. So the problem with toleration is it leads to a paradox, which is that if you are a liberal society where you accept individuals and plurality, you allow difference of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom of dress, expression, all of these things, you're going to allow people whose beliefs are that everyone should conform, everyone should be like them, or certain people should be excluded. And eventually, like these ideas are going to win out, right? Once they get a little bit, they're able to get more, and they erode a liberal democracy to the point where you end up in a totalitarian hellscape. So Karl Popper, when he wrote about this, his conclusion is that you have to reserve the right to shut this speech down. You have to be able to confront intolerance. You have to be intolerant to intolerance, which is a weird problem for any liberal society, that you have to a liberal society must be tolerant, but it must be intolerant to intolerance, if that makes sense. So like, and that's the what where we see that most actively are groups like Antifa, right, where they are directly confronting the things that are seen as the most intolerant and the greatest threats to a liberal society. To a lesser extent, I think this is also evident in what we would think of as cancel culture, which you also write about. First of all, I think we need a definition because nobody knows. Anytime I ask anybody, nobody has any idea what cancel culture is. Tell us a bit about cancel culture.
Yeah, I think it maybe even sort of arises from that same, maybe, I don't know, same impulse maybe, that certain views are kind of just beyond the pale and they shouldn't be allowed. I think the thing to say about cancel culture is that it's sort of it doesn't have a clear meaning. I mean, some people say cancel culture is just bad people getting what's due to them. Uh,
Mhm.
and others people say it's people who are unjustly punished for their speech or actions. And I think there's probably some truth to both of those, that yes, like definitely there's bad people who do get punished, and they maybe like 50 years ago or something they wouldn't get punished because saying such and such thing was okay then, but it's not now. But now people have the power to actually stop them from doing it. And I think that's obviously a good thing. But I think there's obviously cases where it's more difficult because there is basically maybe people get fired from their jobs, or their reputations are seriously damaged for maybe things that they've said, but that are actually there. It's not proportionate, basically, to what they said or did.
Maybe we should back it up and think about what Mill would say about this, because Mill, talking about the harm principle, he's talking about the state, he's talking about government, but he also talks about what society ought to be
Yeah.
like.
Hmm.
So what ought society be like according to Mill?
Yeah. I mean, again, like I think he wanted, again, like maximum ability to find out the truth through debate and discussion and so on. And so therefore he didn't want people to be sort of walking on eggshells for fear of their own reputations and so on. I mean, it's interesting because he mentions like wealthy people, for example, like they don't really need to worry about it. They can say whatever they want
It's those
because
goddamn corn dealers again, isn't
yeah,
it?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But like for
Yeah.
most people, obviously, like yeah, if they're need to rely on working at a job or something, as most people do, to earn their living, then they could be vulnerable to yeah, to being well. Obviously, Mill didn't use this, but to being canceled. And I think, I mean, just to sort of take it to religion, I think the interesting thing is probably for Mill, maybe that was one of the things of like expressing controversial religious views was one of the things he was thinking about here. But I think, but now in our current society, it's for Mill, like religion was probably the most controversial thing, but now it's sort of in, I think, in issues about like race and gender and sexual orientation and so on, like are most controversial. I would think. Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about one of the cases that you cite in the article, where someone flashed a white supremacist sign
Yes.
and got fired. Tell us a little bit about that and how this is cancel culture run amok.
Yeah. I mean, I cited this one article from the Atlantic. I think they give three cases of people who were basically wrongfully fired,
Mm,
or whatever. I think this particular case, he was a guy. I'm not even sure what his job was, but anyway, someone spotted him like driving, and there was some kind of altercation, and basically he seemed to flash this OK sign, which
yeah.
these days seen as like a white supremacist symbol. But actually, I think the guy is actually Latino, and he didn't even realize that this was a white supremacist symbol. But anyway, the people who caught this picture on camera then like kind of pressured his employer to fire him, and they did. That's a difficult one because it's not a case of speech, really. I mean, except in like the broadest terms.
Well, okay. I gotta jump in here on this because that, yeah, like I think in that case, what had happened was he was a driver and he signaled something was okay,
Ah,
literally,
okay, right,
and it
right,
was like,
yes,
and like the person filming either a bad actor or like
yeah,
does not understand context, right? They're a fucking moron. So, and this is so on the one hand, this is the idea of like, okay, this is a someone is using speech that's totally intolerant right? We need to shut it down. This is wrong, right? This is just reputational concerns. This is how we create and enforce social norms, except they're wrong-headed. Recently, there was a guy on Jeopardy who, after the when he came back the second time, he showed one finger, right? Because he had already won one time. Second time, he flashed two fingers, right? Because he won two times. Third time, he extended his pinky, ring finger, and middle finger, right? And tucked his thumb and index finger behind him. And right, so when the camera was on him, he flashed that. And people shot him down for a white supremacist symbol, which tells you that they're idiots and they don't understand context, right? They know, okay, like I'm confused by what this could possibly mean in this situation. But in that case, it turned into a clarifying remark, right?
Yeah,
We're
that's true.
confronted with a symbol now that has very different meanings, and we can't tell it apart in isolation. We can't tell. It's like, is someone winking at us because they think we're cute, or because they told a lie, or because they want our attention? Like we don't understand the meaning without the context. And here, with the Jeopardy case, it allows us to get that context. And I think that these sort of reputational concerns, these this reification of social norms, which has been the part of the dominant form of cancel culture for the past few years, at least, has been really important. I mean, like, okay, here's an example of when that works the way it's supposed to. What I think of as cancel culture, when we canceled someone. I went out the other day. It's amazing. Nathan, have you been outdoors? Have you been outside? I was in I was in a restaurant.
Oh
Crazy.
wow.
I know.
Wow, yeah, that's crazy.
And I was in the bathroom, and it was one of those bathrooms where they had the volume of the music cranked up for some reason.
Right. Yeah.
And it was an old song, and it was a song I love, and I started singing along, and it was PYT by Michael Jackson. And we get to the chorus, and it's PYT, pretty young thing, and I just stopped. And I'm like, I can't. I can't do this, right? There's a reason why people turned away from Michael Jackson's work, why people stopped supporting it. And it's there's a social norm around it that we've created. Just that what he did is wrong. We don't have power to punish him. And it's the same with R. Kelly. People didn't have the power to punish him. The same with Woody Allen. I have a list of Woody Allen movies that I'm gonna watch as soon as that motherfucker dies, but not before then, right? Like I'm going to have to wait to watch these movies because I don't want to support the things that he's done, right? And so this to me, this is this part of cancel culture where it's purely reputational. It's weapons of the weak. It's society saying, people using their speech to say this is appropriate and this is appropriate. But what this individual did is not appropriate. That's vital. That's super, super important. And I think it's been conflated with this employer power, which I think is a grotesque abuse. So, and I think the ones we talked about, that driver got fired. He got fired for saying something's okay. That is not the power of a YouTuber. It's not the power of a blogger. It's not the power of you and me watching this. It's not the power of you and me trying to learn to identify white nationalist symbols. This is the power of an employer punishing an employee to appease someone. Like I don't understand it. I know Disney fired, I think it's Gina Carrero. I don't really know her name. I'm sorry. I don't know anything about her. I haven't seen The Mandalorian. I have seen her in Haywire, and that movie is awesome. And even though she was canceled, I can totally recommend it because she was canceled. Basic for free speech, right? Saying like right wing people are oppressed, and she used the Nazi
Yeah.
analogy.
Yeah, I like something like they're just like Jewish people in Nazi Germany or something. It's difficult because I think there's like a lot of distinctions to draw about whether it's like someone's did a or done a criminal act, and yet there's not any way to hold them accountable like through the law. But then I think there's also like, people who just say bigoted things or something like that. I mean, I feel like the Gina Carano or
This is
whatever, I
so
think,
embarrassing. We really
uh,
should know her name.
I
We
mean,
have computers right in front of us, and we
yeah,
clearly haven't
yes.
bothered to look it up.
No, I
We're
mean, the funny
terrible
thing is, like,
people. We should get canceled.
yeah,
That's what it comes
I would
down to.
like, I would never know who she was, like, had she not been canceled, which is kind of
Right?
ironic, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think I have another kind of example, which maybe is a better one. I didn't cite this in the article, but basically, it was a couple of years ago. There was this guy who he had written like a young adult novel, and previously he had been involved in getting another young adult novel canceled for its like alleged racial insensitivity. Anyway, like this author, he was an African American who was gay, and anyway, like, and I like he's written this YA or like young adult novel but he said it in Serbia, I think, like during the sort of upheaval there. And basically, there was like people were saying there were like unfair portrayals of like Muslim characters, and it was just in general like not. It shouldn't be that an American should dare to write about this situation. And then anyway, his like then sort of a Twitter mob descended on him and then got his book canceled. Like the publisher withdrew it, or maybe he even requested his publisher withdraw it. Which it's sort of interesting because, like, he had previously been involved with the same kind of thing just to another author. But I feel like I think the thing is just that it's definitely narrowing like the range of what people can say like freely without worry. I mean, I think it's okay for people to think before they speak and before they publish something and so on. But at the same time, like I think that the thing to worry about is like this chilling effect in free speech where people don't even bother kind of expressing their views for fear of getting canceled. They just assume that it's better to just not say
Mm.
anything.
Well, yeah, and I think I mean if you are one of the things that this ignores, and I'm gonna bring this back to Mill as well. It ignores power distinctions.
That's true.
If you're
Yeah, that's
in
a good
this
point.
like Mill's world of liberalism, his brand of liberalism, actually liberalism asserts this: we're all individuals, we're all equal, we all have equal amounts of power, and that's simply not true, and we know that this distinction exists. When we think of the reputational concerns, which I think are in play at Mill's level, right? And Mill is telling us you've got to go out there and you've got to brave this, because if you're right, you've got to put yourself out there knowing that you're not going to go to jail, you're not going to get stoned, you're not going to get crucified. Don't worry about that. Just if you're committed to this, brave the slings and arrows and bring the people the truth. And that's okay. And we should allow that to happen in a society. The flip side is if you're bringing garbage, you have to deal with those reputational concerns.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
and
Yes.
that's been a big part of our society. So even the cases, there are lots of high profile cases where we can talk about this, and some of them have been about resources, where it's like if it's Ann Coulter speaking at a university and the students
Mm.
walk out or students protest and say like, we don't want our money spent on this. We know this case. We want fresh voices. We want new voices. We want something different. We want something cheaper. We want you to use our money in better ways. There are arguments about some of this is about resources, and some of it is just like this is not appropriate behavior. This is not like white supremacy is not welcome here. Lying about the election is not appropriate. You're not allowed to do that. You shouldn't be able to do that. It's different from the power distinction of, on the one hand, Disney firing an actress who is pretty far down the totem pole, I'm guessing, or compared to Donald Trump being allowed to say whatever he wants because he can just call in a news program whenever he wants. Those are the two extremes of power. And none of us have that. Like, I am not as powerful as Disney. I'm not as powerful as Trump. We need to keep that power dimension in mind when this is happening. Are we attacking someone's reputation, or are we trying to get them destroy their livelihood for what? For making an okay signal symbol, like, that you don't know. I think it's perfectly appropriate that people who have, I don't know if you saw the case here. One of the people who attacked the Capitol on the attempted coup in January was got busted because he was on Bumble chatting with a lady,
Oh,
and he
right.
he said, "Yeah, I did the raid on the Capitol." Right?
Right.
And then that had consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he ended up in prison, and that's perfectly appropriate.
hmm I think that people should have reputational damage if they say like bigoted things or something like that. Like I think, and even I don't even think it's necessarily a problem like what Disney did in firing Gina Carano or whatever her name
Yeah.
is. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily like a out of bounds. I think that the real problem is when people get canceled for something they don't actually even believe. Like like the OK sign guy is like that's sort of an extreme example, but there are many cases of like or one can think of like examples of people who are get labeled as like a bigot or something like that, but they don't even hold a particular view. Like I think that's the real worry. Like if you really do something and then I mean you should face the consequences of, but it's like if someone wrongly kind of attributes a particular view or something to you, and then you suffer reputational damage as a result. I mean, I think that's unjust and
Yeah, if
not a
it's
good.
unfair,
Yeah.
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 And
hmm
there are cases like that. One of the things I like about Antifa's position, one of the things I appreciate about it, is that it allows that openness. It's one of the warnings that I think is built from Mill is that if you repress this, if you attempt to suppress it and keep it quiet, it goes into channels that you don't necessarily see and you don't understand. So
like white supremacy or
so
something. Is
yeah,
that what
like,
you?
so, and the right has a lot of dog whistles that we don't necessarily understand. We don't know what's going on. The move uh, that's happened to, I think it's like Parlor and Signal, where instead of all of this being available and like that chat that came up in Bumble, instead of everything being available, it gets hidden away, and we don't want that. But we do need to be able to respond and to what is and what is not appropriate. We need to somehow address these massive power imbalances. I mean, if you go back and look at the case of someone like R. Kelly, where it's an open secret that he's going to junior high schools in Chicago, grooming girls, it's engaging in things that are very, very inappropriate, and then paying off the parents, that was known for years, right? And he's got more money, he's famous. No one's going to be able to stop him until he becomes canceled, right? Harvey Weinstein operated in exactly the same way. He was able to do exactly what he wanted until people spoke out. Were able to speak out, which is important to have that power to go out and say this is inappropriate behavior, to be able to speak the truth. So I think that aspect of cancel culture is underappreciated and ought to be celebrated. And in part, I mean, so the thing is, this is beyond atheism, Nathan. How do we fit religion or atheism into this? Why is this important for atheists to know, to think about? Why is this part of the atheist toolkit?
Well, I think it's a more general thing of like what kind of world do we want to live in, or like what kind of society do we want to live in? How do we regulate things like speech? I mean, regulate as a society, but also like at the government level. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure like if I have any explicit way to tie it to atheism. I don't know. Do you?
I'm curious what you think about religious speech.
That's a good. That's a good point. Well, I think like a current example, I guess, is like Charlie Hebdo cartoons. I mean, I mean, that's like anti-religious speech, I would say. But what do you have in mind,
Wait,
like for
which
religious
Charlie
speech?
Hebdo one?
Oh, I mean, anyone, any of them.
Oh,
I
any,
mean,
yeah, right.
well,
Any of their covers.
let's say
Pick one. They're
let's
all
say something like
anti-religious.
about. I mean, I know that there was others that are not about Islam, but I mean, like drawing cartoons of Muhammad or something like that, and how to balance that. I don't know. But I guess like there's the opposite thing of like religious speech. Like, what about regulating like a homophobic Christian speaker or something like that?
Right.
Is
Yeah.
that
And
is
I
that what
mean,
you're thinking
well, I
about?
mean, now I'm trying to think of immediate examples of when religious speech would be considered intolerable, right? Where it's just too harmful for society to hear. But ultimately, like, atheists are not that powerful. One of the things that we have to confront is that, I mean, this is one of the things that's changing, right? And this is something that we have to deal with, is that we're going we're making that move from that part where we only have reputational power, we only have sort of like that consumer level power where we can speak about social norms, right? Religion should not do this, religion should not say that, I'm not going to tolerate that in my personal life, I think this is wrong, blah blah blah. Two, as we become like the majority, which seems like it's happening, if we become majoritarian, that power can translate into the power of the state. Power of the state can translate into the power to suppress religious speech. And this is a reminder that we shouldn't do that, right? That there is value in having that speech be made, with the exception, right? With when is it intolerable?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's true.
right. And I think we kind of see this in things like the creationism debate, where it's, look, most people don't accept literal creationism. There's no way, right? But you've got to go out and you've got to do the work and you've got to talk and you've got to show people, you got to speak the truth as much as you can, even if it doesn't work. That's what religious people think. They think they have the truth.
Uh, you mean someone who's a creationist? Yeah, I think that's probably their goal. I mean, just to bring it back to Mill, I think like he was always concerned about protecting minority opinions. And it's like in his day, obviously, the minority opinion he had in mind was something like atheism, or any kind of like really unorthodox religious views. But I
Yeah,
think
well, I
it's
mean, unless it was about corn dealers, we got to save those bastards.
yes. um, well, I mean, I don't think he was against criticizing corn dealers, just in the context of when like there was like a bloodthirsty mob outside their gates.
Yeah, don't attack their house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Was like, oh yeah, but anyway, like I think it's true. Yeah, like eventually, and if the trend lines continue, that religious people would be in the minority, then sort of secular people are the majority. And then it is like a question of like how to, yeah, what to do. I mean, I don't think it would be good to, because atheists then had the power to like uh they shouldn't basically do what religious people did centuries ago. Have
Yeah,
you know
that's a great point. Right.
um but I mean, but then there's also a difference between like what gets taught in schools versus, I mean, like there are many things that one could be allowed to say in public, but then what gets taught like as part of the curriculum or something like that is an interesting point. And even yeah, like education's always a kind of a hot button thing because like children aren't fully formed
Yeah,
humans
oh,
yet.
that's a totally different can of
Yeah,
worms. And we have to come
yeah.
back and revisit the harm principle someday. But I think that point that you just made is really good. Like the idea, like, just because you're right doesn't mean you just because you're correct doesn't give you the right to shut other people up.
Yeah. I think yeah, and just to go back to Mill, I mean, I think that's something that was important, like because it kept like your sort of intellectual muscle strong to be able to even if you know you're right, like to nonetheless critique like people who disagree with you and so on. So I think that's something. Yeah.
Totally,
Hmm.
totally. But I think it's vital to keep in mind that these like that paradox of tolerance when religion becomes that. I mean, if it does, right? In those particular cases, you can make this argument maybe with things like ISIS and the Taliban. When that shows up in your society where you're supposed to be, tolerant, free speech, and all this, there's a limit there. Mill doesn't recognize that limit. Recognition comes later. There are plenty of arguments to say we do not need to tolerate things that are intolerant because it is too harmful to our society. And that's when things like Antifa, some aspects of cancel culture that are more reputational become vital to preserving an open society, a society that is as open as possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because it's hard to know like what is truly counts as intolerant, such that it's so intolerant that you need to suppress it. I mean, that's where the kind of the difficulty is, I think.
Well, I mean, you know what Mill would say about that.
Probably probably that like it's
You
very
just got to
very hard. Yeah, I mean, you should tolerate pretty much everything.
Yeah,
I
you got to
think. Yeah,
talk it out. You got to talk. You'll
yeah,
figure it out. Just listen to
yeah,
everybody's opinion about is
yeah,
that tolerant or intolerant. I don't know. Let's
yeah,
ask. Let's ask someone else. Let's
yeah,
all keep talking about it.
yeah.
Which
I
is where
mean,
he ends
yeah.
up. It's just like constantly talking about it and not really getting anywhere. It's
That's
really
that. Yeah, that's true. But one example, like I give in the article, is like the American Civil War. So obviously Mill is British, but he's sort of watching this with interest, and he supports the like the northern side in the Civil War. He was not disagreeing with like using military force against people who keep others in slavery. I mean, and it wasn't like his answer to the Civil War wasn't that they like the North and South should just have a debating contest or something
right.
like that.
Yeah.
Like, so I think that's something to keep in mind
Mm,
or to
yeah.
just to say anyway. Yeah.
There's a point where you just got to punch a Nazi in the face. That's it.
Yeah, I think yeah. I mean, the 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 only I mean, I agree in principle, but then the only difficulty is like how to define a Nazi, basically. I mean, but that's another can of worms.
I
Um,
know, and it's
yeah,
this is and this could go on forever.
yeah.
But even like doing this, this is engaging in the process that Mill is
Yes,
advocating,
that's true.
right?
Yes, that's right.
You've put together an interesting article. Where can people find that?
It's at Liberal Currents is the platform. But anyway, I'll link it in the description.
Fantastic,
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah,
mhm.
man, I think I've written well, not 3 sentences, maybe 3 paragraphs in the last month. So my Medium page, nothing's
Oh, right.
happening.
Okay.
No, I got mashed potatoes on the brain. Anything?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, what other business do we need to attend to today?
We've got to say people should subscribe and like the podcast and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we've got a. You can push a button or ring a bell or pull a string or whatever. Like and subscribe. What else do we have?
And then people, if
Nathan's on Twitter.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Just that also people can support the podcast financially if they are so inclined. They can go to the Anchor page, which is Anchor. Let's see, anchor.fm/beyond dash atheism. And then you can click support. And then like, if you want to support the podcast financially, you can do that. And we would be very happy if you did that.
Yeah, and you should do that. Throw a couple bucks our way.
Hmm. Yes.
Um,
That would increase the overall happiness in the world, maybe.
yes,
Yes.
it would it would motivate us to do this a
Uh-huh.
little more.
Uh-huh.
No, but we've let's see. Well, anyway, thanks to Red Japan for another riveting
Yes.
performance. I think they're on Bandcamp. You can check them out.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
And I guess that's it.
That's everything. Yes.
There we
And
go.
we'll be back next time.
We've solved another problem, Nathan. We did
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
We've pushed beyond atheism. We finally gave clear, accurate descriptions of everything that's happening, and we know exactly what we are.
Yeah.
Basically, Antifa, million Antifa.
We know exactly the lines of censoring speech and not censoring them,
We
I think.
we
Yes.
worked it out.
Yeah, it's pretty easy actually.
Perfect.
It's
Yeah,
just like whatever, like thousands of years of philosophy have been solved in an hour.
that's how we
Yeah.
do it. All right. All right. Catch everybody next time.